Welcome, everyone. My name is Joanne Duclas, and I'm going to be hosting our online webinar today. We're going to be exploring international data exchange from a different lens. We'll be learning from our guest, Valère Meus, about Erasmus Without Papers 2.0. And so without further ado, this is the agenda we'll be following. As a small sort of explanation, I personally will need to step off the webinar at about the last 15-minute mark, and my colleague Matt Schultz will take over in terms of moderating any questions that emerge. Let me introduce to you Valère Meus. He is the coordinator to Erasmus Without Papers, and he has had extensive experience in the international realm as a practitioner, but also as a leader. And he will be sharing with us a very comprehensive model for that they are applying to the study abroad community, which I think has tremendous applicability to our work. And he'll be talking a little bit about that because he knows that you've heard about MREX, that you've heard about My Equals, and he is actually, I believe, you're a board member of the Groningen Declaration Network.
Yes. Yes, I am. Yeah.
Yes. I think you
I'm
have
the secretary even.
So he has extensive experience with things that are going on in the data exchange realm all around the world. In terms of moderating, you've met Matt before. He will be helping with the chat moderating. And as I said at the end, he will step in for me as well. And myself, I am the project consulting lead for the project. And we also have Romesh Valdeval, who sits on our steering committee, who's in the call.
Hello all.
And so we will be sharing with you, with primarily Valère doing the talking. So without further ado, I'm going to move to our guest. We are, Valère, going to just take a moment so that Matt can launch the presentation. So.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And thank you for inviting me. So yes, that's the first slide. It's the world's biggest exchange program, as the Europeans like to say, but we can go already to the next slide, if you like. So the exchange program is for higher education only. Well, it's not for higher, it's mostly for higher education only, but now you also have secondary education. More than 4 million beneficiaries, half of which is in higher education. The European Commission wants to triple that in the next 7 years. There's a huge amount of money that is involved because students get grants, but there are also projects. There is staff mobility, youth mobility, volunteering and training opportunities, and also supports for projects. And our project is one of them, which is supported by this overall program. Next, please. Yes, so what is the key process of the Erasmus program? Well, and I'm talking basically about the exchange of students in higher education. This can be both what we call universities or university colleges, which is more or less, I think, like your community colleges or universities. Basically, in Europe, we all call them higher education institutes, so HEI. This is a common abbreviation. So it starts with institutional agreements. Universities agree among themselves how many students will they exchange every year, in which topics. Once this is, and this is of course a whole process going back and forth, because ideally, of course, the number of students sent should more or less equal the number of students received, and that's sometimes a problem. As you can imagine, some of the more southern countries are more popular than some of the more northern ones because of climatic situation. The first time the students are involved is when they do the application. So they apply with their university, and if everything is okay, they are nominated and then accepted by the host university. In order to do so, they have to have a learning agreement which details what exactly they're going to do. So it details all the courses that they are going to follow. And also which courses they replace in their own curriculum, because these exchanges are exchanges during the studies. This means that part of the own curriculum is dropped and is replaced by the curriculum of abroad. And of course, this leads finally to transcript of records, whereby all the results are given. One of the problems there is that not everyone is using the same grading system, so conversion of grades is a problem. But perhaps we can come back to that because I'm also involved in this. Next, please. So it is a project, as I said already, supported by the European Commission. It is now halfway. It is actually the second project. So it started in 2015. It will continue until the end of 2019. We developed a proof of concept, and now we are moving on to an operational rollout. That's the follow-up project. So we are now talking about the real exchange of data instead of individual students trying to find a place in the university and being accepted. So that's the whole idea. In the very beginning, it was individual professors and individual students trying to reach individual professors in the other institute and working out something. This has now changed. But of course, if we want to exchange real data, and by real data we mean data that can be interpreted by computers, so that we can actually also import and export, then the challenge is to create standards that will enable this machine-to-machine communication. What is important to understand is that this project is oriented towards the institution. It has to do with the management of all these exchanges primarily. Of course, the students tend to benefit greatly, but they are not directly involved, because the idea is that once, for example, the students have their once the universities have exchanged, for example, the transcript of records, the students will be able to log into their own university and get it from there. Even though in future we are trying to deal with that as well. And of course, since you know MREX, this is partly what MREX is doing, and we are cooperating with them, and we might include this kind of thing in Erasmus Without Paper anyway. Okay, please, next. So what is the problem? The data exchange is problematic. And why is it problematic? Because even though most of the data are stored electronically, the actual exchange is still largely paper-based, or sent by mail, or sent by documents PDF. And in this sense, we assume, well, we consider PDF to be a document because you cannot normally change it, so it is not machine readable, so it's not real data. So we need a new digital infrastructure to make this possible and to make sure that institutions can exchange this information with each other. Yes. This challenge is a very big challenge. It's not always very sexy. It's a lot of work in the background, but we have taken quite a few steps in the first project, which was the desk research, the use cases, what do universities really do, how can we streamline some of the things. The whole idea is that we interfere as little as possible with the local processes. We want institutions to deliver their data in a form that we can recognize and that we can then send over the network, so that it can be imported by the other institution, the partner institution. That's the whole idea. But of course, you need data dictionaries, data models. One of the major stumbling blocks was security. As you know, security is becoming more and more important. A lot of these institutions use their own software, so they are very local, and they have many times they have local solutions to security issues as well. So part of the time was spent on how can we make this into a system that is secure enough to be used by everyone. Of course, it is a big problem because in practice, a lot of these things were either sent by mail or by email. And of course, as you all know, nothing is more insecure than email. but yet it worked. Now, the practice of exchanging is not such a problem, but the security has to be very considerable. And that is a major problem because we don't really have international standards yet in this thing. So once we had that, we developed a number of APIs for each of the steps, and we developed specifications. We made sure that the server can deal with them, and the whole idea is then that institutions implement these APIs. These APIs are like the connectors between the system or the network and the individual university, and you translate, as it were, your data or whatever comes out of your system into something that the system can work, the network can use, and in this way we can exchange all the information. Of course, one of the issues is also scalability. We're talking in Europe alone about something like 4,000 institutions. Some of them very large ones who send up to 2,000 students a year, others very small ones who may be sending only 10 or 15 or 50 every year. So it is very important to make sure that all of these users are on board, and that again is not that easy. So in the first project we had the proof of concept. Because we have various stakeholders involved in the project, we have individual universities, we have vendors who, of course, make it relatively easy for their clients, because once you buy the software of that vendor, you're automatically connected to Erasmus Without Papers once you use the software of the vendor. We also have national consortiums. In some cases, universities go together, like, for example, in Italy, and develop software together. Not always for all of the institutions, but for a majority. And this is also the case in, for example, Norway, Spain, and so on. So it's a long and a tedious process with lots of details to consider. But from now on, development will accelerate, and we hope to be able to have concrete exchanges very soon now. Yes, please. So, internationalization without paper, ultimately that's what we want. We are trying to find the infrastructure, but the idea is basically the process. The whole project is also unique in the sense that it started as a bottom-up approach from international relations officers, from people who are in the daily working with this administration, and who thought this is very inefficient, this takes too much time, there's too much margin for error. So let's do something about it. And then we called in, as it were, with this project, the ICT people. So it is unique in that sense that there is an equal importance to both ICT people and non-ICT people, even though, of course, I hope you can all imagine that creates friction as well and problems. So the whole idea is to decrease the administrative workload for the higher education institutes, so that they can have more time to focus on quality and support. And on top of that, of course, if the European Union wants to increase the number 3 times in the next 10 years or so, this is not going to be matched by 3 times the number of personnel, that's for sure. So it's not only the students who are the victim of the administrative burden, it's of course the administration itself as well. So the idea is electronic communication leads to faster results and in real time. And the problem is, of course, that at the same time, we're also trying to rethink the whole process, because you know how it is. At the moment, we are basically digitalizing a system that was ultimately paper-based. So once we have it in a digital way, and this is already happening, people are saying, but now that we can do it electronically, we don't exactly have to do it in this way anymore. We could change some of the documents, we could change of the processes, we could simplify it and so on. That's the big challenge for the future. So once EWP is, as it were, operational, we'll have to start rethinking the whole idea anyway. Yes? There are some possible negative impact factors. The majority of higher education institutes in Europe use, or at least partly use, in-house software which needs to be adapted and which is not usually geared towards online exchanges of data in general, let alone internationally. So this means we will have to set up a competence center that can help these people, we provide source code that they can use. We will be doing trainings for ICT people, not only for them, but also for policymakers and so on. It is going to lead to a major change in how some of these administrative processes are done in institutions. The standards are missing, data standards, and even commercial solutions so far did not offer data exchange as a standard. Yes, they may have some limited data exchange among their own clients, but definitely not. There was no industry standard to exchange with others, for example, and the whole thing will only work if everyone is actually be able to using it. And in addition, the mobility documents that you have to fill in for the European Union, because they provide the grants, so you have to have reports, you have to have those learning agreements, have to have a certain template, also the institutional agreements. They tend to change them frequently, and they are often published late, so this means that we have to make sure we can adapt to this. And the whole idea is that the European Union launches its programs in 7 years each time. The present one, which is called Erasmus Plus, will end in 2020, and then there will be a new one. So the whole idea, and that's what we're working towards, is that we will standardize all of this by the new program in from 2021 onwards. But there is still uncertainty about how far the European Commission is going to go in this, whether they will adopt our system and network as a standard, which is either obligatory or only recommended, and so on. So these are discussions that are going on. So in fact, the challenge is not so much technological, it is mostly cultural. It has to do with convincing people that things can be done differently with computers. And I don't know what the situation in Canada is, but in practice, many people are still a little bit wary about computers, and also the recent problems with privacy and so on hasn't helped in this anyway. So that's we can go to the next one, no problem. So I personally believe that we will have to have more cooperation and centralized quality measures that are internationally applicable, especially for higher education institutes. They will have to work together in regions. They will have to use open source, for example, and things like that. Because whether we like it or not, and whether sometimes universities tend to be a little bit conservative in what they're doing, especially the big ones. But students are very digitally minded, we know that, and they will demand more and more digital efficiency. These days, you can do everything in terms of money through PC banking, as we call it. I can transfer money from one end of Europe to another. I can pay with my smartphone and so on. And they say, why should this not be possible for education? And obviously, they're right. But of course, this means that the project results of not only of our own, but various projects should be compatible with each other. So we are also developing guidelines and trying to find synergies with other projects so that in the end we will come up with solutions that can be included in this overall, as it were, community of European higher education institutions exchanging students. And open source, we hope, will help the transition. But as you can probably imagine, this is not necessarily accepted by everyone yet. Okay. So what's the first conclusion? EWP, Erasmus Without Papers, is just the beginning of something far bigger. It is the beginning of internationalizing data exchange among universities. Once we have what we are doing now, we have consciously limited ourselves to exchanges. But of course, once we have these data the exchange. There is no reason why we shouldn't do accommodation and other things. These data, exchange them as well and create new APIs all the time. That's the idea. And yes, international cooperation in software development is probably a must. And we are looking for independent open source modules that can be strung together into suites of tools. I don't know what the situation in Canada is exactly, but Europe is very much into the idea that a lot of this should be public infrastructure, so that it should not be given only to commercial providers, even though, of course, they can be included. But they have to adapt to what the public sector wants and not vice versa. As you know, most universities in Europe are public universities anyway. We have only a relatively small number of private universities. So, and then of course, from the very beginning, you've heard from Joanne that I'm part of the Groningen Declaration Network, which deals with student data portability on a worldwide basis. It doesn't stop in Europe, of course. It needs to be worked out on a global scale. So from the beginning, we have been in contact with people like Joanne, like Pesk, and others, to see how can we create standards that would enable worldwide exchange of data like that. And of course, I don't have to tell you that countries like Canada, Australia, China, Mexico, and so on, or South Africa are very interested in it, and we are having discussions with them as well. But of course, again, the problem is, or the major thing is, we will need common standards. Okay, so let's go into a little bit more detail. You see here a nice picture of Europe and some of the countries that are going to be involved. We have, as you probably know, 27 countries in the European Union, but there are a few extra countries involved in the Erasmus exchanges, and they pay separately only for these exchanges. So, for example, Turkey is involved, and there are Iceland is involved, and a few other countries that are officially not part of the European Union. So it's not just a European Union thing, it is wider than that. You could say it is even Russia is also involved, even though to a slightly lesser extent, and so on. So that's the idea. Okay, let's go to the next. So what's the solution? Well, solutions is to create tools where partners can change the fact sheet data. So the first thing is to exchange data about the universities themselves, about who is dealing, for example, with mobility. Where do I send this information? This changes very quickly. Who is the head of the International Relations Office? Where do I send? Where do I contact people who have to when I want to be nominated and things like that? So this is one of the first things we're doing. We want to online sign the institutional agreement and build it up. We want to nominate students. So nomination means that I, as a university, officially send another university a list of students, and the other universities then says, okay, we will take them all, or we take only these, and so on and so on. The learning agreement, I told you about that, is an agreement between three parties, the agreement between A, the sending university, B, the receiving university, and the student. It's like a contract because it entails automatic recognition. Once the universities accept this, they have to accept the results, and so they have to accept the students' credits. But of course, sometimes students will want to do something in another country that the own university might say, okay, but we feel that this is not really relevant for your studies, and so there have to be some negotiation. Also things like the arrival and departure dates and certificates, because you need them, because you have to make sure that the students get the right grants depending on when they arrive and when they leave, and they can't stay too long in a tourist area, for example, afterwards, and things like that. All these certificates need to be worked out. They can be sent over the network as well. And the transcript of records, of course, is the final result. which then, as I told you before, possibly still has to be converted to the local grades of the home university. Yes, let's go on. So yeah, okay, yes, I was going to say something, but it doesn't matter. This means that partners will have to be even more involved, in the sense that if there is a partner who is a bit late with things and so on, nowadays we send an email, you say, oh, where is this going? The student is waiting and so on. If it is online, of course, all of these things will be noticeable immediately, and the system will only work if everyone actually has the data to be exchanged. So we should have no gaps. We should have a thorough verification of the data. For example, the birthday has to be the birthday dates, the birth dates have to be correct, and things like that. So this is another project, another problem. It has to do with the verification of the data themselves. And I'm sure most of you have heard of GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation in the European Union. Now there is students and anyone not only has a right to see their own data, but they have a right to demand that the data that is held by people is correct. And you can be, if you are, if you sort of know that some data have to be changed, or you were notified of the fact that some of the data were no longer correct, you can be liable for fines. So that's important as well. Okay, let's go on. What are the defining characteristics of EWP? It is very ambitious, and so it is interoperability between more than 2,000 in-house systems, because that's how many we reckon there are. It should be possible to exchange that. The impact is to digitize all the key steps of the management of these exchanges and those of other programs, because of course we have called it Erasmus Without Paper, but it goes without saying that we have been thinking from the beginning of global exchanges. It should work equally well between American and Canadian students and European students. The scale is all the European Charter of Higher Education holders. Those are students that are accepted by Europe as, sorry, not students, institutions as being bona fide universities that can actually exchange students, and there are between 4,000 and 5,000 of them. And the final goal is to grow into a common platform for all kinds of internationalization processes. And as I told you already, the key infrastructure needs to be ready before the next program, which starts in early 2021. Okay. So where are we? I told you already, the concept is, in our view, working. We have shown the feasibility. We are now testing it among various institutions. We're seeing what problems they have in implementing the APIs. And we are going to develop what we call an Erasmus Without Paper hub, which would converge other solutions as well, and we would try and integrate them in Erasmus Without Paper network, because basically the network is a registry. It is manifest files by all the users, and this kind of thing. And of course, the APIs that we have provided for them are just the ones that we are doing for Erasmus, but there is no limit to that. So the development of the hub as a central operational resource has already begun. If you want to be in touch with us, you can go to Erasmus Without Paper EU, and you can find there what is happening. Yes, next. So the Erasmus Without Paper is also about anticipating future needs. So new services can be added at any time, and institutions can also decide not to implement all of them. For example, if they say we have our own system for for working with transcript of records, and we don't want to do that through Erasmus Without Paper. It is not necessary. So each of the individual APIs can be implemented separately, but of course, in the beginning, if you're only sending out your key data, that's okay too. But of course, you will miss out on a lot of opportunities. We are not operating in a vacuum. We already, the online learning agreement project, the Agrocons, which is the European grade conversion system, which deals with this conversion of grades, MREX, which you know about, the European Student Card, ESC, which is being developed at the moment. We have an Erasmus Plus smartphone application, which gives students all kinds of information. EVA, I forget for a second what it stands for exactly, but it's about, it's a separate software for helping with nominations. ESMO is a project, it's a digital project which deals with the exchange of identities. You may have heard that Europe is now introducing the IDAS system, the European Identity System, which is of course, very much linked to the GDPR, and within a few years, all European citizens will have a unique identification, digital identification certified by the European Union. So this is important. This has to be included, and of course, this means that we have to deal with the rollout. We have to deal with a lot of documentation. We have to start up trainings from 2018 onward, and we have to keep track of all the global developments. So there's a lot of things to do. So I will briefly, yes, next one, I will briefly tell you about what are the goals for 2018-19. So we complete the work on the network itself. We launched the network in December 18, and the aim is that by then 700 universities will be connected already as part of the project. We will already have an external project which is also going to be part of it, part of the European Union, where you have to, as in higher education, you have to report on the exchanges themselves and how much they cost and so much, and how much to deal with the finances of the grants and so on. They will develop their own API and send it over through EWP as well. And we are in the beginning of creating an open source repository of technical solutions, because it's time to stop reinventing the wheel in every locality. And this should decrease development costs within higher education institutions, because the kind of digitalization we are talking about will require quite a bit of development by individual universities if they have their own systems. Of course, if they have a commercial system, then in a way they are vouched for, because they can actually use the commercial system once it implements all the APIs. Yes, next. So we launched the EWP Hub, which will be a single point of access to the free and online solutions. I've mentioned some of them already. So we are trying to bring as many different projects as well under the same roof. We want to avoid a digital divide between large and small higher educations. We have commitments of some people that they might even produce a light version of a commercial solution, so that you could use it for free for a limited number of students, so that the very small universities would be able to use them without cost. And these are the kind of things that are going on. We have to put a competence center in place. And of course, I told you that Canada is not mentioned there, but Canada, of course, is also intended partners in the US, China, Australia, India, and others. We want to make sure that we can deal with them. Okay, the next one. I'm almost through it. So we are shifting our focus, reuse and recycle what is existing and make it into a large digital infrastructure. So Erasmus Without Paper wants to be an umbrella for existing open source tools developed within the EU, with EU funding or not. That is the shift of focus from the first project to the second. And we hope to fight fragmentation in this. Yes. So, what is the EWP network? So it is basically a buffet of APIs which you can implement or not. So we call them institutions, the address, the logo, the contact person, organizational units, which faculties are involved, departments, divisions, the courses, a minimal set of data about which course are we talking about, the course number, of course, the title, the number of credits, and things like that. The institutional agreements, I've talked about that already. Outgoing and incoming mobilities with the learning agreements and all of that, the transcript of records, and the mobility tool plus connection, which is this connection that I told you about, whereby individual institutions have to report to the European Commission about the grants they have given and which students have exchanged, so that they can make sure there is no fraud involved. So this modular approach allows future extensions, and this brings me to the dream of, you can go to the next one, the dream of the European, of Erasmus Without Paper. We hope eventually to become the electronic brain of the new Erasmus Plus program, and also anticipate, and this is the other thing, rethink the workflows, how they can be adapted, and take advantage of the new infrastructure. So we have a work group of Erasmus experts, which is in close collaboration or in close consultation with the Commission to try and work out how this could already be part of the new program as well, or how much of it can already be implemented. I think my time is more or less up, so I will leave it at that. I had some more, all of this is just giving you more information. This gives you an idea about how is a development in Europe, the distribution between commercial ones, non-specific IT tools, or other, and SIS, and so on. So, and what do you do in which case? But I think I can stop here. So, Matt, if you like, you can take over again. Thank you. And thank you for listening to me.
So what we're going to do, Matt, at this time is certainly thank you very much for sharing with us an overview. And Matt's going to now moderate Q&A with you. So over to you, Matt.
Thanks. 1 second. I'm trying to find the quick discussion and questions. So does anyone in the group have any questions? I know I have a few, but maybe at this point, if anyone wants to take themselves off of mute and maybe pose any questions they have, that would be okay. If not, I'll go ahead and fire away. I have a few, but it sounds like Ramesh, you have a couple?
Maybe I'll kick it off then, if that's all right.
Yeah.
Just to clarify then, because you mentioned this right from the beginning, that this is predominantly system functionality, basically, for institutions, and so there's no presentation layer or online interface, basically, for students to interact with the platform. Do I understand that correctly? That's basically left to the individual institutions to present as they would normally, even now.
Yes. Well, yes. The whole idea is normally, in most cases, institutions already have the various possibilities, for example, building up the learning agreement and so on. And what we do is to exchange the data between them. This doesn't mean we will not do it, and especially in terms of, because, well, you know, MRECs and how the students can actually get their transcript of records. We are negotiating about including MRECs in Erasmus Without Paper as well. But as a kind of, they could be like separate applications running through the network, but not necessarily connected to this administration of Erasmus. So in a way, you could say that what I've been presenting to you is the network on the one hand. On the other hand, Erasmus Without Paper, the administrative help, as it were, is one example of what could be done through it, right? It is, of course, the main one now, but it is not limited to it.
So as an example then, and you alluded to the privacy piece as being difficult to navigate, I guess, at the initial stage. By implication, there's a consent layer that would be entirely managed and at the discretion of the individual institution as presented to the student, and obviously that would then dictate what data pieces would be pushed through the EWP system, right?
Yes, so it is the institutions who are responsible for their students, right, and for their users as well, which makes it, in terms of security, a little bit easier. And of course, a student has to accept before he is nominated that his data can be used by other institutions, the ones that he is going to. Of course, this is by definition a requirement of the whole thing. Otherwise, he cannot go abroad.
Okay. Thank you.
Do we have any other questions before I jump into a few that have been posed in the chat and other places? Charmaine, do you have anything you want to ask? I see you're not on mute, so I thought I'd ask.
Oh, I'm good for now. I'm still just trying to, I've been really interested in the transfer credit sort of piece in particular, and just trying to think of that in the Canadian context right now.
Right, yeah, Valère, that was one question I have. Does the Erasmus Without Paper project also include transferring? So it includes, like, if I go to an institution in Italy, but then I want to transfer and finish my degree at a university in Germany, let's say, will that be facilitated through the Erasmus infrastructure?
Well, in theory, it can be facilitated through the network, but at the moment, the Erasmus Plus program is mostly about in-study exchanges. So you do part of your study, typically six months or a year, and you do part of that study abroad. So your degree is still given by your home institution, right? But it includes a part which was done abroad. That's the concept. Of course, there are already international master programs mostly that are done, for example, 1 year in one place, another year in another place, and then you get the degree from both institutions. Also, this kind of thing will obviously be facilitated by Erasmus Without Paper. But to go from one place where you finish, for example, 1 year and then you continue in another one, as such, this is not part of the Erasmus program. That cannot be done through the Erasmus program. You cannot get grants for that. You can have student loans, but that's not the same. So this is basically a way to help the granting of students. And also, don't forget, in many cases in Europe, you don't pay registration fees. So students want this to be organized for them rather than go from one place to another and then possibly having to pay registration fees and things like that.
Valère, just to add a context point to your comment here. In Canada, we don't have necessarily, I mean, it depends on the institution, a model where, okay, you go on exchange, ergo you automatically get those 4 months you were away as counting towards your credential in a level of specificity that you have set up. There is one institution I encountered in BC recently that in fact does guarantee that no matter what you've studied, you're going to get that term. And so a lot of the institutions in Canada do a pre-approval of individual courses before students go on an exchange. Yeah. And then when they come back, if they've taken things that are outside that array, then they have to go through another approval process, which is, there's a whole philosophy and paradigm difference in terms of practice that is at the nub of that kind of questioning. And you've answered it, though, where you say that level of detailed analysis is not built into the Erasmus Without Papers. But I think it's something we'd have to be thinking about in even the Canadian context for study abroad.
Yeah. Well, of course, what is included and what you're referring to is what we call the learning agreement, right? A student applies to go to another university, he picks a number of courses, and then the home institute says, okay, we can do it as part of your curriculum. That's the whole point. And then the other institute accepts the student or doesn't accept it. So in that sense, it's included. And this may, of course, be extended. But this is as far as the Erasmus program goes at the moment, and the grants are quite substantial. So students are very reluctant to go outside. You can go as a free mover, there's no problem. But then, of course, you're not supported by the Erasmus program.
Do we have any other questions before I jump into a few that have been posed in the chat and other places? Charmaine, do you have anything you want to ask? I see you're not on mute, so I thought I'd ask.
I'm good for now. I'm still just trying to, I've been really interested in the transfer credit sort of piece in particular, and just trying to think of that in the Canadian context right now.
Right, yeah, Valère, that was one question I have. Does the Erasmus Without Paper project also include transferring? So it includes, like, if I go to an institution in Italy, but then I want to transfer and finish my degree at a university in Germany, let's say, will that be facilitated through the Erasmus infrastructure?
Well, in theory, it can be facilitated through the network, but at the moment, the Erasmus Plus program is mostly about in-study exchanges. So you do part of your study, typically six months or a year, and you do part of that study abroad. So your degree is still given by your home institution, right? But it includes a part which was done abroad. That's the concept. Of course, there are already international master programs mostly that are done, for example, 1 year in one place, another year in another place, and then you get the degree from both institutions. Also, this kind of thing will obviously be facilitated by Erasmus Without Paper. But to go from one place where you finish, for example, 1 year and then you continue in another one, as such, this is not part of the Erasmus program. That cannot be done through the Erasmus program. You cannot get grants for that. You can have student loans, but that's not the same. So this is basically a way to help the granting of students. And also, don't forget, in many cases in Europe, you don't pay registration fees. So students want this to be organized for them rather than go from one place to another and then possibly having to pay registration fees and things like that.
Valère, just to add a context point to your comment here. In Canada, we don't have necessarily, I mean, it depends on the institution, a model where, okay, you go on exchange, ergo you automatically get those 4 months you were away as counting towards your credential in a level of specificity that you have set up. There is one institution I encountered in BC recently that in fact does guarantee that no matter what you've studied, you're going to get that term. And so a lot of the institutions in Canada do a pre-approval of individual courses before students go on an exchange. Yeah. And then when they come back, if they've taken things that are outside that array, then they have to go through another approval process, which is, there's a whole philosophy and paradigm difference in terms of practice that is at the nub of that kind of questioning. And you've answered it, though, where you say that level of detailed analysis is not built into the Erasmus Without Papers. But I think it's something we'd have to be thinking about in even the Canadian context for study abroad.
Yeah. Well, of course, what is included and what you're referring to is what we call the learning agreement, right? A student applies to go to another university, he picks a number of courses, and then the home institute says, okay, we can do it as part of your curriculum. That's the whole point. And then the other institute accepts the student or doesn't accept it. So in that sense, it's included. And this may, of course, be extended. But this is as far as the Erasmus program goes at the moment, and the grants are quite substantial. So students are very reluctant to go outside. You can go as a free mover, there's no problem. But then, of course, you're not supported by the Erasmus program.
Right. Right. So one question I have is, so with the learner agreement, that's all set up beforehand, but is it possible for a student, let's say they enroll in their exchange, once they're in the exchange, if they want to take a course that was not, let's say, pre-approved in the learner agreement, is it possible for them to be able to take that course, or would they have to, like, could that be managed?
Well, there are two possibilities. Either they do it and then they take the risk of it possibly not being accepted when they get home, but it would be supernumerary. I mean, it would be on top of the existing ones, because you have to have a number of credits beforehand in the learning agreement, and these are the number of credits you're going to get in the other institution. So that is one possibility. The other one is that, for example, you go to an institution and all of a sudden you say, oh, but this is not what I wanted. Or, for example, and this may occasionally happen, it's not offered in the semester that I'm going to, it's only offered in the second semester or things like that. Then they can reopen the learning agreement, and if both institutions agree, they can do it anyway.
Okay. And
so the learning agreement can be, we have change possibilities, change annexes, and then it counts officially as well, no problem. But because of the recognition, it has to be accepted by both institutions, right? Both the sending and the receiving.
Right. Okay. And in terms of nominating students for these exchanges, I assume the institutions, in whatever process they have for that nomination, they stick to their own process, right? There's not they don't have to change their nomination process to.
No.
Okay.
They can do whatever they like. So it depends also the number of places you're able to negotiate. In disciplines. In some disciplines, there's a lot of competition to go abroad. In some, there is much less. So some disciplines will do kind of testing only to send the best students. In others, all the places are not taking up. It depends very much on the local situation.
Okay. And when the learner agreement is set between the institutions, I assume both institutions are looking at and comparing maybe the course descriptions. And how does the course description information for the exchange courses factor in? Is that all part of the pre-approval process for the exchange?
Yes.
Okay, so the sending institution beforehand would look at all of that and say, okay, these.
Yes, because the course catalogs, in order to be accepted as one of those institutions at the university, you have to have a digital course catalog which includes the objectives and the learning outcomes of each course. And they are now trying to make them as universal in terms of language use. I don't know if you know about learning objectives and things like that, but as universal as possible, so that it is general attitudes, general skills and things like that. And then you can decide, even, for example, if you're saying you're going to do a course you're doing a course of Belgian law. If you go to Italy, well, you can't do a course of Belgian law there. You would have to do Italian school. But the general skills that are needed to deal with that might be the same. So the own institution might say, okay, this is in line with what the student wants to do later on anyway, so we will accept it. And perhaps he will have to prove afterwards that he knows something about Belgian law as well, but it can be accepted as an alternative. So it doesn't have to be the same content. It can be content that your own university is not offering anyway.
Mm-hmm. Valère, I presume that, certainly with the proof of concept and moving forward in the test phase, you must have identified the steps of institutional readiness, the steps that an individual institution would have to already pass, potentially in a hierarchical manner, in order to fulfill, let's say, the baseline requirements to plug into to the EWP network. are you able to share that that list or that let's say those checkpoints?
Well, it's very much a question of basically what we say is that if the European Union accepts the institution as an institution that can exchange students, so this is the charter. You get a charter. If you like, I can look up the requirements of the charter, but you have to have this course catalog and various things. I don't know all the details about it, and then they monitor this, and this is valid for only for a few years, and then afterwards you have to
yeah, sorry, I should have specified. I was looking more for like from the technical side. What would be the elements that an individual institution would need to have in place, and in what order, in order to then be able to successfully plug in, assuming policy works out, plug into the WP?
Well, the thing is, we have two basic APIs, which is Discovery and Echo. And this basically, the first one just established that the servers can talk to each other, right? Okay. That's the beginning. You have to deal with the security issues. You have to make sure they have to be verified. But again, it's the servers that are identified, not the institutions themselves, right? And the servers, we can verify whether they're bona fide or not, because they may be, well, there are ways of doing that.
Right.
So each university is actually identified through its servers, the servers that is, and we are using the SHA code for that basically.
Okay.
And then afterwards, of course, it is a question of implementing the APIs. And of course, you have to give your Erasmus code, your PIC number if you've got it. So you have to be identified as one of those charter holders of the European Union as well. And all of these together, it's just not one factor, it's different factors, ensure us that you are acceptable as an institution.
Okay.
But then again, basically, if the European Union accepts students from your institution to go abroad and they pay grants for it, well, then we say, okay, that's okay for us. Which doesn't include problems, but okay, you know what I mean, huh?
Right. Yeah. So another question I have, Valère, is are you looking at implementing PESC XML as the standard for the data exchanges, or is that being considered, or is it more kind of the institutions will stick with what? I remember you saying that you were looking at open source standards as well. So
yes, well, in terms of data standards, we use what we call ELMO, which is the same that is used by MREX and which is developed by Gare, who was also one of your speakers, right? Or he is involved in this. And they are very much in touch at the moment with PESC to try and make it into a standard that could be used worldwide. Neither ELMO nor the PESC standards as such are fully compatible yet, but we intend to make them compatible, to have conversions possibilities and so on. And then, of course, it's a question of whether you have the information or not. Obviously, some institutions will not, some of the data will be obligatory, others will be optional. And we're still looking for how much of it will be obligatory and optional. But again, we made it easy for ourselves. The ones that are needed for an exchange by the European Union, for the moment, for us, those are the important ones. See what I mean?
Yeah. So are there any other questions before we maybe wrap up? If anyone else has any, feel free to take yourself off mute or post it quickly in the chat. Ramesh or Charmaine, I don't know if you have any other further questions.
I'm good for now.
Oh, thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
So one question, Valère, would be just, I don't know if you have any high-level advice, maybe as we work through the Arip Groningen project, maybe in your experience, just any words of advice or wisdom or anything to be cognizant of as we move forward?
Well, of course, we are still very much inward looking at the moment because we want to be ready for this new program. But at the same time, we are outward looking in the sense that once it is operational, anyone can join it. We will have to have, of course, new standards of how to accept users and things like that. But again, this can be worked out. That is not a real problem. Yeah, there is the identification of higher education institutions and so on. But we were recently approached by one American vendor who said, okay, we want to be part of this process. We would like to implement your APIs. Can we do this? And in principle, there is no reason why they shouldn't. You see what I mean? And again, of course, it is a question of not so much accepting, or this is one of the questions: do we then accept the vendor, or do we still verify for the partners? Because you're always with a particular partner, right? You're exchanging with a Canadian university, for example, and that specific university, well, you have to have an agreement with them, right? That is already a big thing anyway. But these things still have to be worked out. Will one vendor provide manifest files for all of their users, or will we have completely separate? But both possibilities can exist. But of course, if the vendor has a manifest file for a multiple manifest file for all of the universities that they deal with, then of course we have to make sure how does this actually work between individual universities. But we are working on it because we have 2 vendors on board of the project anyway, but European ones. Huh?
Well, we're at our time here. So, Valère, I want to thank you so much for your time today and for sharing this great information with us and sharing your presentation. As we close out here, I just want to alert everyone on the call that there's a couple upcoming sessions. Again, for here on July 19th and July 26th, there'll be sessions focused in the Canadian context and more of a discussion-based session talking about business requirements on July 19th, and July 26th will be more of the use case discussion. So just be aware of those and maybe flag them in your calendar. We'd love to have your participation and your thoughts on that. As with the previous sessions, we'll be posting this recording, and if Valère, if you don't mind, maybe we can share your PowerPoint as well.
Yes, no problem.
Perfect. So that will be posted on the Groningen website, and of course you can track all of the updates and new things, new happenings and going ons there. You can also email Joanne Duclas. Her email's there. If you have any questions, you can also contact me. My email is not there, but I can throw it in the chat right quick before we sign off. If you feel the need to contact me, can't operate PowerPoint that well, but you know, we're all learning, right? So anyway, thanks so much for your time today, guys. If there's no other questions or comments, we can go ahead and sign off. So thanks again, Valère. We really appreciate your time. And
no problem.
Hopefully everyone has a great day and is staying cool. It's been quite warm here, so hopefully everyone else is getting in the AC and whatnot. So thanks again, everybody.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye. See you later. Bye.